back, and welcome to Women's Perspectives, Insights from the C-Suite. I am Vanessa Bowling Adjavon, Director of Administration and Human Resources here at HACR. In today's session, we will hear firsthand experiences from women who have achieved executive roles in corporate America. Before we get started, I would like to introduce Jen Auerbach Rodriguez, Managing Director of Strategic Growth Markets at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. She's going to say a few words on behalf of our Latina champion sponsor, Bank of America. Welcome, Jen.
Hello, and thank you. It is such an honor to be with you all today. A program dedicated to supporting Hispanic Latino leadership across corporate America. It's all about accelerating these efforts on multiple fronts, and Bank of America is incredibly proud and committed to be doing its part. Not only are we a great place to work for our employees, but we also believe in supporting our clients and being proactive in the neighborhoods where we live and work. And as we look to drive growth, it is so critical that we reflect the diverse clients that we wish to serve. This includes 10 million Hispanic Latino consumer clients and over 1 million small business owners. It's so important to our role in society to address the barriers that exist for certain communities. And so I am so proud of the recent steps that the company has taken in that regard. We've created a $1.25 billion 5-year initiative to help drive economic opportunity, healthcare initiatives, and drive racial equality, with a particular focus on helping to create opportunity for people and communities of color. And this is on top of a $100 million pledge in philanthropic grants committed in response to the coronavirus, on top of the annual $250 million in philanthropic dollars and $250 million in capital to assist with lending to the smallest minority-owned businesses. I'm proud to share that in terms of our teammates, the population of our workforce, our manager population is over 40% women and 15% are Hispanic Latino. And more broadly, our U.S. workforce is 18% Hispanic Latino as well, which is representation consistent with the national census. We have an incredible culture. So much of that is connected to our councils and our employee networks. We have 16,000 members who are actively engaged in our Hispanic Latino Organization for Leadership and Advancement, or HOLA. This panel is going to focus on women's experiences, and I just want to share how important investing in women is for us at Bank of America. It makes good business sense because diverse and inclusive workplaces are essential in meeting the needs of today's clients. And so Bank of America recognizes the significant role that women play in advancing thriving economies, with women owning 37% of businesses worldwide. And as a snapshot, we ensure that Bank of America's current employee demographics demonstrate and reflect that back, with 50% of our global workforce being women, 32% of our global management team, and more than 40% of our managers and 35% of our board of directors. And so how did we get here? By bringing talented women to our company, investing in their career growth, and providing a range of supportive benefits, while also supporting the economic empowerment of women in communities around the world. I am so thrilled and honored to be with you all today. And before we turn to the panel, I think we have just a very quick video that we'd like to show. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Bank of America, for being our Latina champion sponsor. and for your continued dedication to Hispanic inclusion. I would now like to introduce the moderator of today's session, HACR's own Vice President of Strategic Engagement and Initiatives, Guy Vargas. Welcome, Guy.
Gracias, Vanessa, and thank you so much, Jen, and thank you, Bank of America. Welcome, everyone, to Insights from the C-Suite, a woman's perspective. As Vanessa mentioned, we are here to listen to firsthand experiences from the women that you'll meet today who have achieved executive roles in corporate America. Our panelists will discuss their personal journeys to the C-Suite, including challenges and obstacles overcome along the way, and how companies can accelerate the pipeline of Hispanic talent to the highest levels of leadership. This session will also reveal how C-level leaders strategize, thrive during times of disruption, and realign business goals in a rapidly changing world. I'm so excited for this conversation, and I would love to welcome Cynthia Hudson to the stage. Cynthia is Senior Vice President and Managing Director at CNN en Español and Hispanic Strategy for CNN US. Cynthia, bienvenidos. Thank you so much for being here. Please, can you share with us a little bit about your role, where you're located, and your responsibilities?
Absolutely. So as the Senior Vice President and Managing Director, I run all of the Spanish language business for CNN in terms of the CNN en Español channels for US, Mexico, and Latin America, the digital cnnespañol.com, all of our Spanish language audio podcasts, and all of our radio partnerships. And so it's a pretty extensive and sometimes overwhelming job, but it's something that I'm really excited about. I've been doing this for the last 11 years. And I'm one of the things that I was listening to the video from Bank of America, and I love the ending. ¿Y tú qué quieres lograr? What do you want to achieve? And I think that is really such a great question for everyone to think about, because this is one of those dream opportunities that when you're starting off as a journalist, when I was learning, at the university and working as a reporter originally in Miami at Canal 23, I never really thought that I would get to this point. And so there's a long journey there. And I think that those are the kinds of questions that it's helpful to help other Latinos ask themselves so that they can chart their path, because I think that's one of the tips that I will give when we talk further. But I'm in Miami, and I'm so glad to be here. So thank you, Yai, and thank you to the rest of the team.
I appreciate it, Cynthia. I cannot wait to hear a little bit more about your story and your journey to the top. Now I would love to welcome a longtime friend, a colleague, a networker within this entire beautiful space, Stacie de Armas, Senior Vice President of Inclusive Insights and Initiatives at Nielsen. Stacie, for those of you who haven't had the honor to meet you in the Latino community, please tell us a little bit about your role at Nielsen and some of your responsibilities.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Welcome, Cynthia and Jai. I am Senior Vice President of Diverse Insights and Initiatives at Nielsen. I sit within the DE&I practice, but my function is a little bit different than I think what we traditionally see out of DE&I. Often when we think of DE&I, we think about corporate culture, talent, acquisition, we think about development. And what I work on is the intersection of community and advocacy and commercial for Nielsen. My areas of expertise are around developing not just insights, which we work on significantly at Nielsen, but inclusive insights that really drive impact and change. So in the past, you've seen some of the work that's come out of Nielsen around community groups that perhaps has been more top level. My new role is around really diving deeper into the data for actionable outcomes. The areas that I tend to focus on a little bit more now in the new role that I am in is not just around audience, but also around content, which is really exciting. I think people don't recognize that when we think of Nielsen, we think of TV ratings and audience measurement, which is a very important part of our business, and we do that. But we also focus on content and metadata around content. My area is to help elevate some of the diverse and inclusive insights around content metadata. And then, of course, there are outcomes, right? How when you put it all together, what that means for brands and organizations. I'm honored to be sitting in this space. I have, like Cynthia, I've had a very long journey in DE&I from very early in my career, where I was so privileged to, sort of fall into a space that was growing and expanding. And gratefully and graciously, there were so many giants who took me under their wing and allowed me to grow. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about the benefits of those sorts of mentorship relationships moving forward. But I'm honored to be here. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Stacie. And for those of you who haven't read the incredible reports that Stacie has developed with her team, make sure you download the one that's called Latina 2.0. That's my favorite one that you've worked on. And of course, you've all met and heard from Jen Auerbach Rodriguez, who is the Managing Director and Head of Strategic Growth Markets at Bank of America Merrill Lynch Wealth Management. Jen, welcome back to the stage. We appreciate you being here. Is there something else you'd like to share about your role?
Well, I would just say, I've been in this role heading up strategic growth markets for about 4 years. And, just to sort of say a little bit more behind the words of strategic growth markets, it really was a realization of the leadership team that the demographics of wealth in our country are changing and changing at a dramatic pace. And that's on the heels of the sort of realization that if wealth were to have a gender in the United States, it would similarly have gone through quite a transformation over the previous 3 decades. And so strategic growth markets is a way for us as a firm to describe that we see it and we know that it's happening and we want to lean into it in real and tangible ways. And that has been, grounded in a listen first approach, in that it's a reckoning that oftentimes financial services as an industry has sometimes felt more complex. Oftentimes it feels like there's a wall of words that requires a dictionary at hand to truly sort of understand. And we believe that it is our job to be more accessible. And it is, a commercial imperative for us to be accessible, particularly as we are seeing such incredible changes and trends in terms of the wealth owners and creators of today and into the future. And in addition to strategic growth markets, I'm also responsible for broader acquisition efforts and retention efforts for Merrill Lynch Wealth Management.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. We are going to begin our panel conversation and discussion. I say very specifically conversation because I want to make sure all of you who are listening in can access the chat box. Please send us some questions for these incredible women in the C-suite. I'm going to start with my question first, and I'll engage Cynthia. Mm-hmm. Cynthia, tell us a little bit more about you. What would you say was your breakout moment that really set you on track to be part of the C-suite level within leadership?
Wow, that's an interesting question because I don't think that there are specific moments that lead to one outcome, but rather being able to take advantage of change, right? So I think the biggest thing that we all fear is change in our environment, change in our corporate structure, change in ownerships. And those things actually become a real opportunity, I think, for people who understand that change is actually a natural part of life. And if you look at change as an opportunity always from a more positive perspective, you're going to be able to take lessons from each one of those moments and grow from there. In my case, I can say that I had started off on camera in terms of being a reporter and producer in the local news. And I realized pretty much early on that I wasn't really feeling the fulfillment that I had expected when I had worked originally as an intern on a show that was very similar to 60 Minutes. And I realized that really the producers behind the scenes had more power than the actual reporters that were out on the street at that time in local news. And I really, went back to my bosses who had hired me because here I was with this very American name, Cynthia Hudson. My father's American, my mother's Cuban. I was born in Los Angeles. Was not raised in Miami. What a surprise. I lived in different places before I ended up in Miami. And it is my home and I love it. But, I'm glad that I was able to have so many different experiences before actually making this my home. Because it opened up my mindset and helped me to see the world from a very different perspective. And what I can tell you is that I had gotten into programming and production, and I was able to, really develop some great opportunities while I was at Univision and later on at Telemundo. And then came the shakeup of the change of ownership of Telemundo. Telemundo went through, having to deal with the consolidation of its old junk bonds, the way it was founded. And so it was taken over. And that's when I literally lost my job. Not because of any problem, but because there was a shakeup that ended up, all of the management team ended up leaving. And it became the biggest opportunity of my life. And because I realized that I then could start looking at life outside of that small spectrum of 2 Spanish language networks. And I was able to get into international TV development in cable when cable was growing. I was able to work at Cosmopolitan Magazine, developing their TV brand, Cosmo TV, for Canada, for Latin America. I was able to jump and do so many different things and continue to grow and not be afraid of that growth. And I can tell you that it's a daunting thing when you're a woman and you're young and you're trying to, start a family. I had children, and you're always worried, oh my God, is this going to be the right move for me? And what I can tell people is change is great if you are not afraid of understanding that it's an opportunity. And if you trust in yourself. And this is something that's hard because I think we all doubt ourselves at some point. We all wonder, is someone going to see what I think I can bring to the table? And I now deal with my daughters who are older, and I always tell them, it's up to you to show them. Because what you can't expect is for people to just see it because you think that you're so wonderful and perfect that people are seeing these great attributes and qualities in you. You really need to step up to the plate and bring your A game every single time. And so that again is another lesson, that got me here. And then, I would say that to be at CNN, I've already been here now 11 years, and I've really done a lot of major changes in what CNN and Español was and what it is today. And that has been, the kind of thing that I love to do. I love creating new projects around important brands. And in this case, when I was offered this opportunity, I thought, wow, here's the premier brand in news. But in Español, we really hadn't done what we needed to do. And so I felt that this was a huge opportunity for me. And what a change. I moved to Atlanta again because I had lived there as a child. And then I'm back in Miami. But, it's one of those things where if you're not afraid of change and you're not afraid of bringing your A game and knowing how to do it in a way that people don't feel intimidated and don't feel that they are somehow trying to step on them to get anywhere, you're kind of following things the right way, I think people do see your value and your worth. But you need to be able to know how to present it. You need to know how to give the value proposition and have people, because at the end of the day, what you're asking people is to invest in you. And when you're asking people to invest in you, you're asking people to stake their reputation, to hire you, to give you the opportunity, and you need to make them look good. So there has to be a return on that investment. So I always, look at these lessons of my life as kind of what I'm going to joke around. I tell my daughters all the time, apply your life strategies the way you apply makeup. Start with the base, then look at the vision, then make sure that your cheeks and your smile are working for you. It's really a process. And I think that'll be the name of my book someday.
I love that. That's incredible. Count on us to buy 1,000 copies. Absolutely. Cynthia, you're very confident. You exude this incredible power to be able to advocate for yourself. Have you always had this personality? Have you always had this confidence? Did you ever have a mentor or someone helping you become who you are today?
Oh, I've had several mentors. And I think that that's also part of what you want to do is you need to find allies. You need to understand what your what your strengths and your weaknesses are. We all have weaknesses, and not being self-aware is a big problem, because if you don't know what are the things you need to work on, I know that I can be intimidating sometimes. And I knew that my personality, here I was, I look gringa, I have a gringa name, but I'm very Latina, I'm very Cuban, I wave the hands, So I knew that there were certain things that I needed to temper in order to be able to get people not to see just those things. You need to also understand that there's a reality of working in the corporate world. And I think my mentors have gone from some of the, somebody like Helen Gurley Brown at Cosmo, God bless her. She's no longer with us, but she was there when I started. And she was one of the magnificent women who really gave me a sense of not to be afraid, because she had really faced a lot of adversity to become the groundbreaking female editor at a time when there were none, and to bring stories and topics that had not been done before. And in the case of my work in news, I can tell you that, when I started, I needed to rely on all of the other reporters and producers and news directors. So I've had many mentors along the way. And that's another thing I would say. It's recognizing that you can never do it alone, and also recognizing that you have to be grateful in the process. Because gratitude is something that I think it really empowers you to be a better manager, to be a better person. It's the people that don't have that sense of understanding that, they didn't walk off from the Wonder Woman set. Nobody does. We all need people to rise on their shoulders, to grow from that. And, no matter how talented and smart you are, you're going to be working off of the strengths of other people who have helped you to get to where you want to go. So my recommendation is always have gratitude, see the opportunities, and at the same time, understand when someone has given you a hand, and when someone has offered you their advice. You may not realize that advice is necessary at this moment, but if you are smart enough to recognize that you don't know it all, and a lot of people still haven't recognized that, no one knows it all, you will suddenly start really appreciating those nuggets, and they'll come back to you, and you'll say, you know what, I remember when this was a piece of advice. I even go back sometimes to the advice of my grandmother. I had a very feisty Cuban grandmother who had to start all over again. And part of those are lessons, and those are part of the inspiration, because you can't let those people down. They've started all over again for you. And the pressure is on. I think as women and Latina women, we have a lot of pressure. We have cultural pressure. When you become a mom, you wonder, oh my God, am I being judged because I love my career? Doesn't mean I don't love being a mom, but I can do both. And there's people that are judging you, from your cultural perspectives and expectations. So we all have to face all of those issues and be able to address them. So, having that ability to recognize your strengths and weaknesses, put the weaknesses in check, and say, here's, these are the things I need to work on sometimes, and these are the things I need to really let people know are never going to be an obstacle. Because that's the one thing that I also, give advice when I talk to some of my, my new younger staff. It's, don't let your own preconceived notions be your own worst enemy and your own obstacle. And so I think we sometimes come into an organization already with a bunch of preconceived notions about people, about ethnicities. We sometimes are worse with each other than we should be. We need to support each other and be friends and helpful and extend that opportunity. And that I always hear people, oh, because of my mentor and my mentoring. And then you really kind of think that they're saying it because it's the right wording to use, and it's the, I remember when we come up with these buzzwords of the moment. But there are some things that are just basic, and you can never have too few in terms of mentors and allies, and you can certainly alienate people if you don't realize how important they are.
That's right. That's right. I appreciate you, Cynthia. Thank you so much for sharing that. Stacie, I'd love to ask you a question. I understand that you recently took on a new role. I would love for you to share with us a little bit about that new role and how it's given you a little bit more perspective into your accomplishments and perhaps taking you out a little bit further from your comfort zone. Tell us a little bit more.
I'm so glad you asked that. And it actually is, from what Cynthia said, it's almost a perfect segue. One of the things, as you were talking, Cynthia, about your advice to your mentees and others, it really made me think a little bit about this new role that I have and the journey I've had over the past 12 months. I think it's really important for, as we're thinking about not necessarily our limitations, but how we want to grow. It's easy for us often to put ourselves in situations that are perhaps more comfortable or just a little bit out of our comfort zone, because we also want to, there are cultural pressures, as Cynthia indicated too, where you want to ensure that you represent it. And frankly, it's not unlike what we're seeing play out today in media around content, right? The hottest content is there's so few pieces of content out there about our community that the pressure for every piece of content to be perfect in every single way is so great. I think we often feel that in our own careers, right? And without giving too much away, I'm sure many of you know what I mean, that we have to be perfect in every single way because all eyes are on us because there's so few of us. One of the things I had to get really comfortable with in this new role is, and Monica Hill actually said this when I used to work for her many years ago, and she said, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And we've all heard that term. But I remember stepping into this new space and really having to allow myself to be really vulnerable and ask questions and be curious and be less concerned with how I might be perceived in the fact that I didn't know something, or it wasn't a strong part of my history or background, or I didn't have this, technical or engineering expertise. And it was a really important part of my journey in that I had to come to terms with my own knowledge or lack thereof and be vulnerable in that space and be willing to ask questions, be curious, and learn. And through that experience, I will tell you, just in the past year, Jai, I think I have learned more and stretched more than I have in any other given time period in my career. And it's really as a result of sort of taking those walls down and saying, okay, I don't have technical expertise like this. I'm not a data engineer. And being willing to ask those questions so that I can advance and grow. And also, I think recognizing it's okay that I don't have necessarily that piece of expertise. And really, this is just like career advice. I'm in that room for a specific reason, right? I don't need to know how all of those technicalities pull apart. I need to understand what's happening so that I can apply my experience, my expertise, my DE&I lens to what I think the industry wants to happen, and then try and bridge that gap. And it really is a learning exercise, because I think culturally we feel, not unlike the example I just gave, there's so much pressure on who we are because there are so few of us at the top of an organization or in leadership roles, that we feel like we have to know everything, do everything, show up for everything. We were talking earlier as a panel about the pressure we felt, prior to COVID, and traveling and being in those rooms because we're representing all of those behind us. And a lot of that comes through in our work and the expectation of our knowledge set, which is why we burn the candle at both ends and we learn and acquire. And so really, Jai, it was that finding that vulnerability in myself and being okay with not knowing what was happening, and that comes alongside with the courage to ask those questions and learn and get up to speed. But that perhaps is the most important part of this journey, that for me personally is that vulnerability and saying, I'm going to put myself squarely in this space and I'm going to ask some questions and I'm going to listen to words that people are saying and I'm going to Google them later. And I'm, really being comfortable in not needing to lead all of those conversations, but learning so that I can guide and lead, after I've had that acquisition of knowledge. It's been remarkable. And I think it's good advice, as you mentioned, Cynthia, for mentees and really for ourselves. We have to remind ourselves it's okay. We don't know absolutely everything about everything. And we don't always need to project that. It's okay for us to stand down, be vulnerable, learn, be courageous, and then take that knowledge and then be bold with what we know to be the next direction.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And I don't think maybe you did realize this, but having the vulnerability in front of others that are watching you as a role model, you are actually leading the way for them to be comfortable asking those very difficult questions in those meetings as well. So I'm sure you inspired many men and women who are watching you as a role model so that they are able to say, sorry, what does AI or ML stand for?
I hope so. I hope so, because I really did feel, I felt a lot of pressure moving over into, some of the new spaces I sit in now. But I did have to, just recognize that I'm in that room for a reason. Someone decided I should be there because they knew I should be there. And so my job was then to, take this learning curve, absorb what I needed to do, be vulnerable in doing so. And interestingly enough, and this reminds me of what you said, Cynthia, about mentors, I've found people along the way, these organic development of relationships that I wouldn't quite call mentors, but it's like this support network. And I think we all have them, right? They're people who you can ping on the side during a meeting and say, hey, what exactly did we mean by that? Or can I find you for 5 minutes later to explain that? And I think those sorts of relationships are really valuable along the way.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Stacie. Jen, I'd love to engage you a little bit more. What about the leadership or corporate culture perhaps surprised you when you first joined the C-suite? Share with us any story that comes to mind.
I think that it really is that once you think you reach some level, which, I'm not really sure that we've sort of pinned that down, that suddenly it's like your decision and everyone falls in line. I think that the relationship aspect of kind of continued success and getting things done and building coalitions still rests so squarely on one's ability to forge relationships with sort of expected partners, but unexpected partners too. And so, I think that has been, really an important thing for me, where I am now. And I also think that, just reflecting on some of the comments that Stacie and Cynthia just made too, I feel as though so many of us are like the sort of natural outputs of our upbringing, of our culture. I was raised by a Dominican mother, a Jewish American father. We prioritized education above really all else. I was expected to get A's, and if I didn't get an A+, right, we wondered why. And I do think that this idea of sort of working really hard and keeping your head down as sort of the means to that next step is another important shift that took place, at least for me, over the past 3, 4, 5 years, which it really became sort of less about one's technical skills, one's sort of repository of information, and much more about connecting dots and seeing how things interacted and were connected with each other, and then knowing the individuals to go to bring sort of ideas that otherwise felt disparate to really converge in a way that could become a strategic initiative, something that we could rally around and behind. And so I think for me, it's really those two things of what it took perhaps in the earlier stages, or even in some of the more middle stages. I hope I'm still in somewhat of a middle stage of my career, but to recognize that the things that we really leaned on at one point won't necessarily be the things that we'll need to lean on into the future. In fact, I would say expect to have to use different muscles in order to, see the advancement or experience the advancement that you would like to see. And I, somewhat perhaps differently from Cynthia is I consider myself to be so misplaced in corporate America. I started out on an options trading desk in the Great Recession in 2007, 2008, and I didn't have a voice. I truly was such an introvert, and arguably I still am. It's one of it's my Achilles heel in so many ways. I think that the other lesson that I have learned is it's okay to know where your strengths are, know where your weaknesses are. And so long as you do that and are willing to sort of put yourself out there, you can too find a place for yourself in perhaps a traditionally extroverted, corporate culture. And so I think the combination of those things, really speak to where I am in my career and sort of those milestones to getting there, to getting here.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure that so many people feel the way that you do, and you are exactly where you need to be. And you're an incredibly, wonderfully articulate introvert. So thank you for sharing those thoughts and your story. Cynthia, I'd love to take it back to you. I want to ask you a question. Have you ever been passed over for a position that you thought was actually very much needed for your trajectory to the C-suite? And if so, how do you respond to being passed over for that position? And what did that experience teach you?
So, it's interesting. I think the only time that's happened to me is actually one of the best things that ever happened. I was really, I had been working on a show for a long time, and I was, they were trying to make a new change in the show formats and looking at new programs. And I was kind of upset that having had the experience, I didn't get the senior job on that particular show of production. But what ended up happening was that it opened the door for me to then look within myself to say, do I really want to continue doing show production, or do I really want to continue building my knowledge as a business person within the industry and a strategic person who's developing much more than just one daily show? And so it became a blessing, because that's how I was able to get into programming and executive producing on other things that allowed me to grow my career. And at the moment, I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened to me. So I think that, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that sometimes those changes that you think are the ideal situation for you become opportunities if you can really, introspectively analyze, is this what I really want, or is this the right thing for me? And what I've come to do in my life with that is to say that, it goes back to that old fatalistic approach of everything happens for a reason, and all the things that we've hear are told to us in Spanish, and all of the phrases that we've grown up with. But at the same time, they all tend to be true. So I just think it's a matter of understanding that life is not controlled by you. And I learned that several times, and I learned it the hardest way was a few years ago. My daughter, one of my daughters, my middle daughter, was very sick. She had a brain tumor, and she had to have major surgery. It was terrifying. As a parent, it's probably the worst thing that you could ever hear someone tell you, is that your child has a brain tumor. And I went through a very difficult, dark time. I was working, and I'm very blessed that my bosses allowed me to spend the time that I needed to with my daughter in the hospital. And since then, my daughter today, thankfully, has actually just been accepted into 2 law schools, and will be starting law school in the fall. But we went through a long period of time. She actually ended up having another surgery a couple of years ago. And I learned 2 things. I learned several, but the 2 big ones that I always remind everyone of is that I'm not driving this. No matter how much of an A-type personality you are, there are decisions that you just don't control. And what you can do is either understand that you're a passenger on this road and take advantage of the view, get off the bus when you have to, and use the facilities and move on. And of course, I'm being very metaphorical here, but it's really true. And I also realize that problems that you can solve with a check are not problems. Real problems are the ones that have no solution, and that no matter what you do, you can't decide if that solution is going to be yours. And so those kinds of lessons came along the way. And, you know, again, I think that we as women, and I bring it up again because this is a part of who we are. You know, we tend to, especially if you are a leader, especially if you are somebody who has a take charge personality, even if you're an introvert, but you have strength of conviction, it's very hard for us to sometimes relinquish control and understand that it's better to learn the lesson from that change than to assume that you are going to be able to maneuver and make change on your own. Nothing happens that way.
Wow. Thank you, Cynthia, for sharing that incredible, heartfelt story. I have goosebumps, and you must be so proud of your daughter. Congratulations. So thankful for you to share that with us.
Thank you. As a parent, there's nothing more horrible than having a child who goes through something as horrible as that. But at the same time, those again are part of the lessons that we learn and part of growing resiliency.
Wow. Thank you so much. And Stacie, during our conference, we've actually heard many stories of mentoring and mentorship. Can you share with us how you've taken the time to perhaps advocate for young men or young women that are looking up to you for some career advice?
Sure, I'd love to. And I do want to, I think it's, again, a good segue even from what Cynthia just talked about. And I feel like we've talked a little bit in this session about, sort of parenting and as women and the way that we are, looking after those around us. And mentorship is sort of part of that. One of the things I think that's really important to acknowledge is that for many of us, and I think, not all of us, but for many of us, and in my personal experience being first generation, I didn't have the networks in place that made mentoring just sort of a natural fit for me when I, came really into like my professional career. I didn't have other people to lean on through, my parents or other people that could really help me step through and build my career. So I'm grateful for those who have stepped forward and showed an interest in my career along the way. But because I didn't have those networks, it's interesting when I think about how I have developed my relationships with those who mentor me now, and of course, those who I mentor. And it initially starts as like a sort of a patchwork, right? There are people around you who take an interest in you and give you advice, and you can lean on for different things. I mentioned earlier in my own journey to sort of acquire some knowledge so that I could be in that room for what I was supposed to be there for, which was to help make decisions and drive, not necessarily know all of the ins and outs, but enough so that I could make some effective directives. And I would consider some of those, and I mentioned there were people I knew I could lean on and go to. So that's sort of what that patchwork situation looks like. I think there's some pressure on us as Latinos when we look and think about, do we have a traditional mentoring relationship with someone? And if we don't, then we haven't, we're not doing it right. We need to have one. There's a lot of pressure, but we also need to recognize that sometimes those relationships look different, right? It's a patchwork at times as we advance to find mentors and hopefully ultimately sponsors. I have, and they often grow organically, right? And so I have several mentees who I work with at varying stages of their careers. And there's one in particular who the way it unfolded, it wasn't with a question, can you be my mentor? And that's not at all how it unfolded. It unfolded with this person taking interest in my work, as many do, but really wanting to lean in on a specific project and me needing the help. And so we sort of organically started working together, and through that developed mutual trust. And that mentorship now, what's wonderful about those, and those of you who have mentors that fit into this bucket, the difference between those relationships that are mutually beneficial and where there's vested interest on both sides. As this particular mentee is advancing her journey and had this amazing opportunity, it was my pleasure to participate with her through her, the negotiation process and just moving through that as mentees do. But because we had developed this really close relationship that organically grew, I was able to be more effective for her. So I think my advice to those of you that are seeking those types of relationships or that have some that potentially can turn into those is continue to invest yourself, honesty, your time, and transparently engage in those conversations with your mentor so they can really help you grow, advance, and find those right spaces. I will just close by saying, again, this was an organically grown relationship, and of all those that I have, it's among one of the ones that I don't know if I would say the most proud of, the one I'm the most just honored to be a part of, watching this person advance. And I'm at a point in my career now where I can help influence and engage, and I'm honored to be able to do that for this person. And I encourage you all, there's a difference between asking outright for someone to mentor you and letting that unfold and engage in a way that, it can really flourish into something that's mutually beneficial.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Stacie, what comes to mind is the incredible importance of financial literacy and wellness. And I love the fact that you've been able to be a mentor to this young woman through her salary and career negotiations. Did you have someone in your life doing that for you when you were coming up in your career?
I did not, and I'm going to apologize for a little background noise. That's how that unfolds. But we're gonna power through it because it is important. What I love about that is I didn't have someone earlier in my career that taught me and walked with me and told me you can, ask for more. And that's I'm really making that that's just too broad of a statement, but really walking through what that looks like, right? It's not about necessarily, as I coached her, asking for more. It's about what is required of this job? What is the skill set for this position? And what are they looking for? And then how do we position it such that we're not talking about one person getting more? We're talking about the value of the skills that the team here is looking for. And I mean, small success. I don't know how much I can say, but I have to tell you, we were both beyond screaming in our text exchange when we went through that process, because it's always risky. But I also know in my own journey, if you don't start that early and have someone help you learn how to manage that, the step ups that you make really they start on some of those earlier discussions. How do you negotiate your value? How do you have those conversations and ground them in something meaningful so that you're not just asking for more, but you're being strategic about your value and placing that on the table for consideration. And I was honored to be part of that journey for her. We were very excited at the outcome, and I am hopeful that more of us in the position we're in today can have those conversations with our younger mentees and help them find equity in that space, because we don't know we can do that. I don't know about many of you, but I didn't even know I had permission to have those kinds of conversations. The offer is the offer, you're grateful and you're thankful, and that's how you proceed. I didn't know I had permission or that it was respectful. How could I respectfully have a dialogue about my skill set being a match? And I was grateful to be able to advance that conversation with her. And I'm hopeful that more of us will have those conversations with those that are coming after us to help our talent really advance and well position themselves for growth. Thanks for asking that.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. If you are listening and you don't have someone that's helping you understand your financial literacy and wellness, please, please, please go out of your comfort zone and find that person. And like Stacie was mentioning, it doesn't have to be a formal mentorship relationship. It can evolve naturally. So now we're going to go into the Q&A aspect or portion of our panel session. Please send us your questions for Cynthia, Jen, or Stacie, but I can see the chat box and we have an incredible amount of questions already. So I'm going to start with the first question, and I'm going to kick it over to Jen. The question comes from one of our attendees, and the question is, what gender-specific challenges, stereotypes, or barriers have you had to overcome during your career, if any?
I love that question. I grew up in this multicultural home where my identity always felt, I was always hyper aware. I don't exactly look like my mom or my dad. I look like the perfect mix of the two of them. And I was raised in, the Jewish faith. And so there were so many times where I felt misplaced from that dimension. There were so many times where, I felt misplaced because Spanish is not my first language. It's barely my second language. And so there have always been sort of moments of me feeling like, I'm just a little bit different from everybody else. And I would just say that perhaps that has afforded me a blessing in that I got really comfortable with being just a little bit different from everybody else or from most people. And so it's not to say that I was sort of unaware of being different, but it was more that, and the panelists have talked about this too, Cynthia, you in particular, that resiliency. It didn't ever feel like it was an insurmountable stereotype for me, and where I think sort of being betwixt and between also helps in the sort of fluency, that malleability of still being true to myself, but also being okay with pulling my hair back tight in a bun when I really wanted to make sure that I was coming to the table as prepared as possible, and similarly feeling just as okay with the curls flowing on the beach. And so I think that, stereotypes are certainly real. And for many of us, perhaps more pervasive than others. And I would just say, do your best to not let it get in the way of where you want to be and where you deserve to be. And that's not to say that I don't still have to give myself lots of pep talks to, make sure that we come to the table, ready to go with our suit of armor on. But that's the best advice I can give in terms of stereotypes.
And it's fantastic advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. Cynthia, you mentioned that you have a daughter, and so this question is for you. As a woman, you always consider your family when deciding how to respond to different opportunities. That is that nature of being a working parent. Reflecting on your COVID experience specifically, has your approach to work-life balance and family and work balance, has it changed? Has your definition of balance changed into your parenting and working life now?
Wow. Early on, I made a bit of a decision that I didn't want to have a lot of small children at the same time. So I kind of spread my kids out because my mother was a university professor, and she went and got her PhD when I was a little girl. And I remember the difficulty that she had with 3 very young children and trying to balance getting a doctoral degree, teaching, working. And I thought, I don't ever want to do that. That's really hard. And I remember it being something that I was affected by, seeing my mom trying to be superwoman and still, luckily enough, having my grandmother to help around. And so I chose to kind of spread my children out. I have 3 daughters, actually. And that helped me. However, I can tell you that we as women, obviously especially if you are have a career, it would be impossible for me to say that. And I was, one of my jokes when I worked at Cosmopolitan for many years was that I did believe women could have it all. I'm not sure that you can always have it all at the same time. So sometimes we have to kind of say, you know what, I need to make room and I need to sparse out my time so that I can do things effectively for each of the groups that I'm trying to please, and in addition, not go crazy myself. And so that helped me as well, because I was able to kind of compartmentalize the way that I sparse out my time and the way that I look at decisions that I make. And so one of the things that I did was, make sure that everybody knew that I was never going to miss important dates for my children with regards to birthdays, school events, and I would build my calendar around their calendar. I obviously, when my middle daughter got sick, that changed everything, because my entire life for 10 years was, how does this affect that child? And so I think that it's a very difficult thing for women because we feel that extra pressure. And all I can say is we cannot be afraid of asking for help. And we cannot be afraid of taking advantage of the village if you are fortunate enough to have one. And if you don't have one, make one. I'm very lucky that I was able to afford, care at home for my children. And I can tell you that still today, my daughter's first nanny is still our friend. She has gone off to raise her grandchildren, and she still sends presents to my daughters. And so those things, you build those relationships. But it's also understanding that for me, the priority for people that I hired to work in my home with me was not my house. It wasn't whether the floor was vacuumed. It was whether my child was well cared for.
Beautiful.
And so you have to there's things that you have to, sometimes I would be like, wow, the kitchen is not so clean right now. But then I would look at my wonderfully happy children and think, that's more important.
That is
so
it.
You can't stress out over everything, and you can't be perfect. I mean, the perfect doesn't exist.
It does not. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for sharing with us some of those nuggets of wisdom. We have 1 minute left in our incredible panel and program. But before we close, I want to give Stacie the opportunity to answer this question, which is one of the most important questions I believe that has been asked. Stacie, what do you think that men can do to be stronger allies and advocates in the advancement of our Latinas within our companies?
Wow, that's it is such a good question. I thank you for giving it to me. I will be quick. I see that timer. I think the most important thing men can do is, of course, right, be allies, be sponsors, and work with us. But I think also be really good listeners. Just before this session, I had a call with someone in my organization who is not my mentor and not my sponsor, but one of those supporters I have in this trusted circle I keep talking about. And I got a little vulnerable in that call in thanking him. And I'm going to get it again here for all he has done to support me in this journey, being available, listening, offering information, talking, and that helping me sort through things in a way that is so important and valuable for my journey. And so perhaps if I'm going to end quickly and simply, since we're nearly at time, I would say the most important thing men can do, in particular men that have power and influence at organizations, listen and really work as best they can to understand the challenges and the pressures, whether they are business or personal, that we're bringing, and help us remove some of those barriers when possible. Of course, there are many women in those positions as well, and I appreciate all of them. But men in particular, I think the best they can do is listen and try and really understand where we're at and where we need support. I'm grateful to this individual, and there are many others, but I'm grateful to the men now professionally in my life that are supporting my journey.
Thank you so much for sharing that story and for your emotion and your transparency. That is the end of our session today. I want to thank Bank of America and Jen, Stacie, and Cynthia. If you're all watching and you haven't yet connected with these incredible leaders on LinkedIn, please do so. I would love to welcome Vanessa back onto the stage so that she can welcome back our CEO, Sid Wilson. Vanessa, thank you for having us.
Thank you, Yai, and thank you, Cynthia, Stacie, and Jen, for giving us a glimpse inside your journeys. I would now like to bring back up HACR's President and CEO, Sid Wilson, to close out our session and tell you more about tonight's HACR Young Hispanic Corporate Achievers Awards ceremony. Welcome, Sid.
Well, thank you, Vanessa, and of course, thank you, Jai Vargas, for moderating a great session. I do want to also give a very heartfelt thank you to Jen Auerbach from Bank of America, Stacie Armas from Nielsen, and Cynthia Hudson from CNN and CNN Español. That was an amazing session, and what a great way to sort of bring us all together in terms of why we put these programs together, not only to how we can empower Latinas, but how we can make sure that we're building strong allies. Because I love that last question on the importance of allyship.